This week we're just gonna geek out about Paolo Banchero because Paolo Banchero is having a really, really breakout season. And I want to frame it this way, Brendon. I was just in thinking about him and thinking about where this NBA season is going and thinking about where that Magic team is going. He is really high up on my list of guys I want to see in the playoffs this year because I cannot wait to see how it stretches him, how it pushes him, how he adapts to it, what he goes through. He's having this year where his usage is super high. His assist percentage went up. His turnovers, as you would expect, went up a little bit. But if you look at his turnover percentage for what he is, it's only gone up like a little bit on a usage rate. It's not even been a one-to-one thing. His usage ratio is better than it was as a rookie. And he's developed into a 3-level scorer. This guy feels like the complete offensive package. The next step for him is going to get to be put through the ringer in the playoffs and see where he goes and see how he translates in that regard. Certainly, I think still room for him to improve in certain areas. I think particularly at the rim, considering his size, you would expect him to be a little better than 60% at the rim and kind of up his efficiency in that way. But how do you feel about that? Is this someone where you're with like me, you want to see how he goes in the playoffs, see how that translates, and see kind of what that brings out of him at this point in his career, very, very young career?
Yeah, to me, he's kind of the Anthony Edwards of this year's postseason, right? He's the guy that is going to get his first crack at what we expect to be a potential championship type ceiling with him as one of the lead guys on a great team. And that does bring something, brings high highs and low lows. Even Ant, who we both believe in, it's not like he's averaged 40 every night, every postseason game, right? He's a high turnover guy as well and gets kind of lost in the flow. I know Ant has had more than just one of those. He hasn't gotten out of the first round yet, but I think Paolo's in for something similar. What is funny to me looking at sort of his statistical profile a little bit like you were, and you mentioned the number, it's almost like the thing that Paolo needs to get better at is what we already expect that he will eventually be great at, which is getting to the basket and finishing. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's sort of, it's kind of right there. It's low-hanging fruit almost, just with his physical profile, how hard we know he plays, and how unstoppable he looks at times when he does play that way. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, he's only getting to the basket a little more than a third of the time, and he's finishing at, as you said, at a 60% clip. But when he does attempt shots around there, he tends to get fouled. So it's kind of like if he can develop the strength and footwork and core strength and balance to just get into those tight windows and finish through contact, I'm not really sure how you stop this guy. And the passing and the playmaking and the cleaning up the turnovers, that's just going to come, I think, from reps. We see younger players deal with that all the time. We just mentioned it with Ant, but that feels like kind of the only missing ingredient if this shooting increase this season from deep is real. We're already talking about a pretty fully formed offensive player, and he will be, 22 heading into next season. It's pretty crazy what's kind of sitting on the table for him right now.
This is also just a guy that I think some of this stuff, if I'm making an argument for them being buyers at the deadline and for the sake of him, and just in that specific vein, Brendon, I could see a world where they just go get a competent, I don't need them to go get an all-star point guard. I don't need them to get someone who's going to be their long-term answer. I don't think that player is even really on the market for them right now. But imagine if they just got someone who is better at setting the table for him and maybe just gets him easier looks times, organizes him better. A lot of the times I feel like he goes awry when this team just gets dysfunctional and this team ends up being a little bit all over the place in a way that means he's freelancing. That means he's driving into contested shots at the rim. You get a
taking
real
just bad pull-up jumpers.
Yeah, and it's like you don't need to do this if your offense is functioning properly. You get a world where they go get Tyus Jones, they go get pick Monty Morris. Just get someone who can run the show and distribute things and keep the trains running on time. You're probably getting just a little bit of an uptick in efficiency for Paolo that could make a big difference. Again, I think that's a long-term roster question for them, and How much does Franz fill that? How much does Paolo himself kind of grow into that kind of creator for others to kind of be the structure himself to some degree? That's obviously a big test for any young creator, and it will tell us about where his ceiling is ultimately. But I think that's just the thing for him. If I kind of want to bring the best out of him right now, I want that kind of guy on this Magic team. It would set him up for success, I think, in a real way if you get that kind of guy.
It's funny. It'll be interesting in like 5 years to look back on the randomness of some of it selected, right? They didn't build the roster that way, like you said, but also they've had injuries. Also, their draft position meant that Franz and some of these other guys were naturally who ended up on the team. And like, the Vooch trade, they kind of won that trade, but it's like, all right, well, you get Wendell Carter Jr., who's another big. That's the best asset you could have gotten from the Bulls, but okay, he happens to also kind of clog the paint and be a center too. And all that opens up to make Paolo have the ball in his hands way more than I think anyone would have thought. Like at Duke, it was like, oh, wow, and he can kind of pass a little. Cool. And then in the NBA, it's been like, all right, brother, win us some games. You know what I mean? And a lot of the time he's done it. Like they were pretty solid last year. They're legitimately good this year. And he's getting to kind of develop and get those reps on a productive, competitive team. Like that's sort of the best of a lot of different worlds. I wonder what it'll mean for his role and his style as he ages, but it's kind of the best you could ask for in a lot of ways. I just think, as you're describing with the guard play, one thing that feels obvious, and maybe it is Franz and him, although you can switch that pick and roll, but he's only getting 4.5% of his possessions as an offensive player this year are as a roll man.
Yeah, that's not enough.
In the pick and roll. That's such a small number for somebody that you just imagine, whether it is scoring or whether it is making plays in the short roll as a passer, a la Blake Griffin or Draymond Green. That role is tailor-made for him. So that to me is like just an obvious statistic that jumps out when you kind of break down how he's been used and what's kind of sitting there to be pulled at even more as they build out the rest of this roster. So yeah, but look, like his floor is so freaking high. This guy's 21 and he's already doing this stuff. We just talked the other day about first-time All-Stars and we agreed he had a pretty decent shot at it. He's 21. He's in year 2.
The offensive game is just insanely advanced. It is insanely, like, competent is often not, Phil Brennan, like a compliment that is like fun to give out, but there's something really awesomely competent about what he is. And again, I think that's more rare and is more valuable, and I think I at times have realized or valued. I think just having like a baseline level of something does ultimately really, really matter. To your point about rollmen, we talked about this in the relation to the World Cup in the summer about him playing at the 5. Do you know how many? Have you looked at the how much he's played at the 5? Have you looked at just how wonky some of this data is so far?
No.
Okay.
Give it to us.
138 total possessions. That's not a lot. Most common lineup with him at the 5 is 15 possessions. It's Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, Caleb Houston, Franz Wagner, and then Paolo. There's 2 other lineups with 15. One is Anthony Suggs, Gary Harris, Wagner, and Paolo. The other one at 15 is Suggs, Anthony Black, Wagner, Jonathan Isaac, and Paolo.
They have too many centers.
So this is kind of the thing. They have too many centers that are decent, right? Like, because they have Mo Wagner, they have Goga Batadze, they have Wendell Carter Jr.
And Jonathan Isaac, who really is only a center at this point because he can't really do anything on offense.
Right. So you can't like slide him there. And then when they've done it, it's like it feels very much just like if you just look at this and then you go back and look at some of the film on this, it's very much just like we have to do this at this one time and we're going to ride it out for a little bit and then we're never going to think about it again. And it feels like that. And I think long term, I want to see Paolo as the 5 where he's rolling and doing Giannis-y things where he's the fulcrum of the attack in a different way. That might require, I think, a more trustworthy guard as your point guard than an Anthony or a Suggs, where Franz maybe slides into, like, if we're making analogies, like a Chris Middleton kind of situation in that regard, where he sometimes runs a pick and roll and oftentimes is the team's point guard, but also spots up and does other things off ball. There's something here. The data on it for this year is really bad, offensively especially. But I don't even want to. You can't even take some of this for much because it's such a small sample and scattered that it's like hard to even like know what to make of it if I'm looking at this. But I want to see more of it, is my broader point. I want to see a lineup at some point where it's like 250 possessions and instead of 4% as a roll man, it's like 10% of his possessions as a roll man. And I think he becomes more efficient in that, even if we want him to do the 3-point shooting stuff and all of that is great.
I think it's going to be like one of the weapons on his tool belt, right? I think we're probably getting past an era where you want that to be like a constant look for you because size is king right now in the league. And yes, they have a lot of centers, but what they don't have is a lot of big forwards. He's kind of the only one. Franz is not really that as a defensive player. And so are you switching a lot, or are you kind of overexposing yourself with too much aggressive help defense, kind of like the Jason Kidd Giannis deployment back in the day, and that can run into some issues with big teams or teams that have a lot of shooting. So I want to see it be more than nothing, which is pretty much what it is now, but kind of where it ends up is going to be a cool subplot too, and what they see it as and how they draft and acquire players too. Because, I think we're identifying, right? It's not just a guard that they need. It's probably a little more of those defensive wings and forwards that they'll probably want to add too to build different types of lineups around him going forward into the distant future, 10 years from now.